Valeria's heart stood at the edge of the grand staircase, listening to the laughter echoing from the living room. Her heart tightened as she saw her fiancé, Marcus, and her younger brother, Julian, laughing with Elise, the girl who once had nowhere to go. Elise had arrived a year ago, wide-eyed and vulnerable, taken in by Valeria's mother out of compassion after Elise's parents died in a fire. At first, Valeria welcomed her like a sister, offering comfort and inclusion into their affluent home. But over time, Elise began to twist herself into every part of Valeria's life, subtly but persistently. She joined Valeria's research team, shadowed her at the hospital, and inserted herself into family dinners and private moments. The final straw came when Valeria saw Marcus clasp Elise's hand a little too long at the charity gala. That night, Elise shattered the last connection between Valeria and her late mother by breaking the framed photo in the hallway. Her father called it an accident, but Elise's satisfied smirk told the truth. Valeria knew then that Elise was not just a lost girl. She was a storm that had quietly destroyed everything in her path. Valeria retreated to her room, locked the door, and stared at the half-completed design of her bioresonance heart implant. It was her late mother's dream to heal without scars, to make surgeries safer for children born with congenital heart defects. Elise had recently hinted that she might present a similar prototype at the upcoming MedTech Expo, the one Valeria had been preparing for all year. Rage surged through her veins like venom, burning away the disbelief she had clung to for months. Her life's work, her love, and her family were being pulled from her like threads in a frayed sweater. Marcus had been distant for weeks, brushing off her affection and defending Elise's presence. Julian had canceled their weekly coffee meetups 3 times in a row. Her father, once her fiercest supporter, now seemed colder, less willing to question Elise's influence. Valeria began to wonder if her grief had blinded her to the creeping rot around her. She stared at the blueprints, then at her suitcase in the closet. A choice stood before her: stay and be erased, or vanish before they could bury her. That night, Valeria penned 3 letters, one to her father, one to Marcus, and one to Julian. Each letter was soaked in truth, sharp with the pain of betrayal, and laced with a quiet goodbye. She folded her mother's locket into the last envelope and sealed them with trembling hands. No farewell words were spoken as she walked out the door with her suitcase and prototype in tow. The mansion faded behind her like a hollow monument, its foundation built on illusions. She boarded the midnight train to the city, where a private research institution had once offered her a position. She had declined back then to stay close to home, but now it felt like fate offering her a second chance. As the train cut through the darkness, Valeria stared at her reflection and whispered, "Let them miss me when I'm gone." Her tears didn't fall, they had dried into resolve. The girl who had once given too much was gone. What remained was a woman who would rebuild from ashes. 3 months passed, and the Hart household felt colder, emptier, more so than any of them dared to admit. Marcus found himself searching Valeria's face in Elise's eyes, a mistake he couldn't explain to himself. Julian tried to call Valeria once a week, his messages unanswered, and his guilt growing heavier. Elise had secured a spot at the MedTech Expo, but her designs lacked the complexity Valeria had mastered. She lied her way into a presentation slot, claiming co-authorship, while the family watched proudly, too blind to see the cracks. Rumors began circulating among researchers that Valeria was working at Ascend Labs, developing a revolutionary implant under a pseudonym. Marcus tried to brush them off, but fear crept into his gut like cold water. Elise noticed his distance and clung tighter, masking insecurity with charm. But charm had a short shelf life, especially when the lie beneath it began to show. Julian grew suspicious, digging into Elise's past and uncovering inconsistencies. Truth began to leak like gas into a sealed room, and it was only a matter of time before the spark hit. Valeria adjusted the microscope, her breath steady as she calibrated the tissue response in her latest heart implant prototype. The laboratory at Ascend Labs was sleek and efficient, with a quiet hum that soothed her frayed nerves more than any apology could. She had thrown herself into the work with obsessive focus, determined to perfect the design her mother had once dreamed of. Her mentor, Dr. Emil Navarro, saw her potential instantly and gave her full reign of the project. Every night she stayed late, the sterile scent of the lab washing away thoughts of Marcus, Julian, and her father. But the memory of Elise's smug face lingered in her mind like cigarette smoke, bitter and stubborn. Sometimes, Valeria would reach for her locket and feel the hollow where photo used to be, the absence stinging like a bruise. Revenge wasn't her fuel. Not yet, but justice was, and it was growing stronger by the day. She was rebuilding piece by piece, but her heart had turned cold to sentiment. Only purpose remained, and purpose never lied. Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in the dim glow of his study, staring at the unopened letter Valeria had left for him. It had been 3 months since her disappearance, and each day without her grew heavier. Elise had slowly woven herself into his space, but her touch lacked the spark that Valeria's once ignited. He told himself he was happy, that things were simpler now without Valeria's intensity. But when Elise joked about erasing the past, Marcus felt his stomach turn. He remembered how Valeria used to stay up sketching implant designs on napkins, dreaming aloud in that soft, hopeful voice. Elise didn't dream. She mimicked, she copied, she took. And deep down, Marcus knew she had taken Valeria's place too easily. Regret bloomed like mold in a sealed jar, quiet at first, then inescapable. Still, he couldn't bring himself to open the letter. What if it confirmed that he had failed her in every possible way? Julian, on the other hand, had begun digging. He visited Valeria's favorite cafe and spoke to her old colleagues, piecing together her trail like a detective. Elise noticed his absences and grew anxious, often guilt-tripping him with dramatic stories about how hard it is to be the one left behind. But Julian wasn't buying it anymore. One evening, he returned to the attic and found a discarded version of Valeria's implant blueprints, one that Elise had claimed as her own. The date on the page predated Elise's arrival by 6 months. Something snapped in Julian's chest. He realized then that he had been complicit in his sister's exile, too distracted by charm to see the rot. That night, he called Marcus and demanded a meeting. "We need to talk about Elise," he said, his voice low and tense. "And about what we let happen to Valeria." The weight of those words hung between them like a storm cloud. Back at Ascend Labs, Valeria sat before Dr. Navarro and presented her newest prototype, the Chronocore, a heart implant that synchronized with real-time vitals using micro-adaptive tech. Navarro was speechless for a moment, then applauded her brilliance, already contacting the expo organizers under her new pseudonym, VH Leone. Valeria gave a small nod, satisfaction rising in her chest. She had stayed hidden long enough. Now, it was time to reclaim her name, even if masked behind initials. She signed the final design sheet with steady hands, unaware that across the city, Elise was watching a news alert on her phone. Breakthrough heart tech unveiled by unknown researcher at Ascend. Panic rippled through her like static. She recognized the implant structure. It was Valeria's. Elise dropped the phone, her pulse hammering in her ears. The ghost she thought was buried had returned, and this time, she wasn't silent. The next day, Marcus opened Valeria's letter. His fingers trembled as he read her words, calm, clear, and devastatingly honest. She had loved him once, deeply, but could no longer beg for space in a heart already shared with lies. She wrote of Elise's manipulations, her father's silence, and Julian's growing distance. But the part that struck deepest was the final paragraph. "I'm not asking for regret. I just want you to remember who I was before you forgot me." Marcus sank to the floor, letter clutched to his chest, the realization carving through his insides like a blade. He had lost something irreplaceable, not just Valeria, but the man he had been when he loved her. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and for the first time in months, he felt truly cold. Elise paced her room in frantic circles, gripping her phone so tightly the screen dimmed from pressure. The news article about VH Leone's medical breakthrough had already gained traction online, and the heart implant sketch was unmistakably Valeria's. She screamed into a pillow, afraid someone in the house would hear her unraveling. The stolen prototype had been her trump card, her golden key into elite circles, and now it had turned into a noose. Worse, Julian had become distant, withdrawn from her antics and no longer buying her saccharine words. At breakfast, he barely looked up, his eyes clouded with thoughts he wouldn't share. Marcus, too, had grown colder, his affection forced, his touches hollow. Elise could feel her grip slipping and her carefully constructed mast beginning to crack. The fear of being exposed coiled in her gut like a serpent. She needed a plan, something quick, something cruel. Julian finally confronted their father in the study, spreading Elise's fake design sheets across the mahogany desk. "She took Valeria's work, Dad. She lied to all of us." His father stared at the pages, pale and unmoving, as if the truth were too heavy to process. For a moment, there was silence, and Julian wondered if the guilt would finally pierce the man's denial. But their father stood and muttered, "We did what we thought was best at the time," before walking away. Julian stood frozen, disillusionment seeping into his bones. His family, once the pillar of his world, had become a monument to cowardice. He knew now that he had to find Valeria, not to save her, but to let her know someone still believed in her. Guilt might have driven him, but the fire in his chest was something more: redemption. He booked a train ticket to the city that evening. No good brother would remain silent now. Valeria sat in the observation lounge of Ascend Labs, watching the city's skyline flicker in neon hues. Her design was now fully patented, and the board had officially listed her under her full name, reclaiming the legacy Elise tried to erase. There was a hollow kind of peace and victory, the kind that came not from applause but from quiet certainty. Yet part of her still ached when she thought of Julian, of the boy who used to sneak pastries into her lab when she forgot to eat. She wondered if he missed her, or if Elise had poisoned him entirely. The pain wasn't fresh anymore, but it hadn't healed, just scabbed over with purpose. When Dr. Navarro invited her to be keynote speaker at the MedTech Expo, Valeria didn't hesitate. It would be her first public appearance in months, and the world would finally see who the real genius was. She didn't want revenge on stage. She wanted truth, raw and unfiltered. Marcus found himself wandering the garden paths Valeria used to stroll, drawn to the places her absence echoed loudest. He clutched the letter again, reading her words until they etched themselves into his memory. The guilt gnawed at him, more potent than any punishment Elise could offer. He couldn't ignore Julian's call anymore, couldn't pretend that Elise's story still made sense. Everything about Elise was an echo, similarities painted to match Valeria but lacking soul. He remembered the warmth in Valeria's laugh, how her eyes lit up when she solved complex equations. Elise had never had that passion, only hunger. Marcus realized too late that he had loved the light, but chosen the shadow. And now, that choice haunted every hour of his waking life. He finally told Julian he would join him in the city. "We owe her the truth," he said quietly, "even if she never forgives us." Elise received the expo invitation through Marcus's email and felt her world shatter in slow motion. Valeria was returning, publicly, triumphantly, and unmistakably. She screamed again, this time throwing a vase across the room, the shards mirroring her composure. No more pretending. No more waiting. She would confront Valeria face to face, spin the story if needed, twist sympathy into her favor. But some part of her knew the audience wouldn't buy it this time. The illusion was falling apart, and there was no charm left to cover the truth. Still, Elise couldn't accept losing. Her desperation was venomous, and she would use every drop if it meant survival. She slipped into Marcus's office and copied the expo guest list. If Valeria thought this would be a clean ending, she was mistaken. The final act was coming, and Elise intended to rewrite it in fire. The MedTech Expo opened with grandeur, neon lights bathing the polished floors in glowing blue. Professionals from across the country gathered beneath the dome, whispering about a mysterious keynote from a young genius named V.H. Leone. Valeria arrived early, dressed in a sleek charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a braid, her mother's locket resting just beneath the collar. She hadn't set foot in a room like this since her exile, but now her name stood on banners, not Elise's. As she walked through the hall, whispers followed her, respectful and curious. She met Dr. Navarro at the back of the auditorium, who gave her a nod of quiet pride. "You're not just presenting," he said. "You're claiming your place." Valeria looked at the model heart device on display beside her name and felt a surge of calm. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield was hers now. Julian and Marcus arrived just before the keynote, the tension between them thick but unspoken. Julian carried the original sketchbook Valeria had left behind, the one Elise thought she had destroyed. Marcus gripped the envelope that once held her farewell letter, now reread so many times the edges were fraying. As they moved through the crowd, more than a few eyes turned, recognizing them from past articles with Elise. They didn't flinch. Julian's jaw was set with purpose, and Marcus carried the heavy air of a man facing judgment. They didn't speak as they took their seats near the front, watching the stage where Valeria would soon appear. Both wondered the same thing: would she see them as brothers or as strangers? Behind them, Elise slipped into the last row, hood up, face shadowed. Her fingers clutched a flash drive, shaking. Valeria stepped onto the stage to a silent audience, the spotlight casting her in full view. For a moment, she just stood there, absorbing the space she had once been denied. "My name is Valeria Hart," she began, voice steady, "and this design is the culmination of years of pain, research, and silence." The crowd leaned in, spellbound. She walked them through the chronocore's design, its real-time adjustment mechanism, its regenerative tissue ring, its potential to save thousands. Each sentence was a stitch in the wound Elise had left, each fact a nail in the coffin of the lies once told. And then she paused. "This device was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to honor someone I lost, and to remind me that no one can steal your truth if you hold it tightly enough." Gasps rippled through the room. In the crowd, Marcus lowered his head and Julian whispered, "She's still her." Elise couldn't take it anymore. She stormed down the aisle mid-speech, shoving past chairs, her face red with rage. "She's lying," she screamed, the flash drive raised high. "She stole from me. I have proof." The audience recoiled, security stepping forward, but Valeria lifted a hand calmly. "Let her speak," she said coldly. Elise's voice cracked as she spun a trembling web of half-truths and manipulated timelines. But when Valeria motioned to Dr. Navarro, he held up the signed patent forms, dated, notarized, and registered months before Elise's alleged designs. Elise went pale. Julian rose from his seat and handed the sketchbook to the event moderator. "Compare it," he said, "page by page. It's hers." The silence that followed was louder than Elise's outburst. Cameras flashed, and murmurs became condemnation. Elise was escorted out, her sobs echoing in the hallway like a crumbling castle. Marcus wanted to follow her, but didn't move. Instead, he stood and faced the stage. Valeria's eyes met his, unreadable. The auditorium rose in a standing ovation around her, the noise deafening, but her gaze didn't break. After the presentation, she disappeared into the green room, not waiting to hear apologies or witness remorse. She had said what needed to be said. Outside, Julian waited, the only one brave enough to face her. "I was wrong," he whispered, "but I never stopped missing you." Valeria looked at him, tears gathering but not falling. "You believed her," she said quietly, "when I needed you the most." He lowered his eyes, then held out the locket, now repaired. "But I want to believe you now. If you'll let me." The door between them remained open. Valeria stared at the locket in Julian's hand, her breath shallow, emotions warring beneath the calm mask she wore. For a moment, she didn't move, her fingers curled into fists at her sides. She remembered the day she found that locket shattered on the floor, Elise's smirk etched into her memory like a scar. Julian had once promised to protect her, and yet, when she cried out, he had looked away. "It's not just about what you believe now," she said softly. "It's about how quickly you let go of me before." Julian nodded, accepting the weight of her words without protest. I don't expect forgiveness, he replied, but I wanted you to know that I found my way back. It took me too long. Valeria took the locket gently, thumb brushing its edge like she was feeling for something lost. I'm not the same girl you left behind, Julian. I don't think I can be her again. His smile was sad but grateful. That's okay. I'm not the same either. Meanwhile, Marcus stood outside the green room door, unable to knock, unable to turn away. He had seen her brilliance on stage, stronger, sharper, and more radiant than he ever remembered. The letter burned in his coat pocket, its words a reminder of all he'd broken. He had loved Valeria once with an intensity that scared him, but fear made cowards of people who should have stood tall. Elise had offered ease, comfort, illusion, but Valeria was fire. And he had run from the fire until it burned everything down. With trembling hands, he pulled out the letter again, reread the line that haunted him most. I want to be missed for who I am, not remembered for what I lost. He finally knocked. When Valeria opened the door, the look in her eyes struck him with the force of a tidal wave, familiar but colder. You look invincible, he whispered. Maybe I had to become that, she said. They stood in silence, the hum of fading applause still echoing in the hallway. Marcus looked older, tired, not just from time, but from truth sinking in. You were always ahead of me, he admitted. I just didn't realize how far until I watched you walk away. Valeria didn't respond immediately. Her voice, when it came, was low and careful. You didn't watch me walk away, Marcus. You let me go. The distinction pierced deeper than she expected, but she held her composure. I was grieving, breaking, drowning, and you handed me the weight instead of a lifeline. Marcus nodded, guilt etched into every crease on his face. I came to ask if there's anything left between us worth saving. Valeria looked away for a long moment before answering. Maybe there's a lesson. Maybe there's a scar. But a future? I don't think so. She closed the door gently but firmly. Outside the auditorium, Elise sat alone in the back of a police cruiser, hands shaking around the cuffs on her wrists. Her crimes were finally coming to light: plagiarism, fraud, falsifying records. The weight of the world she tried to steal was now crushing her under its truth. She had once believed she could shape herself into someone like Valeria, someone brilliant and beloved. But imitation only went so far. Without substance, it crumbled. The detective in the passenger seat scrolled through Elise's record, unimpressed by her tears. Funny thing about lies, he said. They always unravel faster when you're trying to wear them like armor. Elise sobbed louder, the expo building vanishing from view behind her. No one was coming after her this time. No more second chances. No more borrowed light. She was finally alone, and she knew she had earned it. Valeria sat by herself on the rooftop of Ascend Labs that night, the city buzzing quietly beneath her like a sleeping giant. Her keynote speech was already trending online. News anchors were calling her a visionary, a miracle worker, a phoenix. But none of those titles quieted the ache in her chest, the ache that came from surviving betrayal and having no one left to come home to. Julian had reached out, Marcus had apologized, but neither could turn back time. The girl who once believed in family, in forever, had died the day they chose someone else over her. Still, she was here, breathing, thriving, building something no one could take. She opened the locket and placed a new photo inside, her and Dr. Navarro, standing beside the chronocore prototype. Her second beginning. The wind lifted her hair, and for the first time in years, Valeria let herself smile, not for what was lost, but for what she was finally free to become. The morning after the expo, headlines swarmed the internet, declaring Valeria Hart as the medical field's rising star. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests, research collaborations, and messages from colleagues who once overlooked her. She sat in her office, surrounded by flowers and congratulatory notes, but her heart remained still, quiet. The victory tasted bittersweet, like a meal served cold after a long wait. For all the praise, none of it could undo the hollow places carved by betrayal. She had expected to feel something bigger, something more, vindication, perhaps, or a long overdue sense of belonging. Instead, she felt distant, as if she had watched someone else climb the mountain in her name. The only email she answered that day was from Julian, thanking him for standing up for the truth. She didn't forgive him, not yet. But she didn't close the door either. Some wounds deserved a slow healing. Julian returned home to find their father seated in the library, the fireplace casting long shadows against the bookshelves. He hadn't spoken much since Elise's arrest, spending hours rereading old journals and newspaper clippings about Valeria's early work. Julian walked in, unsure of what to say, until their father spoke first. "She reminds me of her mother," he murmured.
"Fierce.
Unforgiving when wronged, but soft once you've earned her trust." It was the first time in years that he'd spoken about Valeria's mother without defensiveness. Julian sat across from him, watching the flicker of regret pass through the old man's eyes. "We failed her," Julian said. "All of us. But she didn't let it end her." Their father gave a small nod. "Maybe one day she'll come back if we're worthy." Silence settled between them like dust. But for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a beginning. Marcus avoided returning to the estate, instead checking into a quiet apartment across the city. He filled the space with books, silence, and the absence of Elise's perfume. He tried to focus on his work, but every glance at a heart study or medical journal reminded him of Valeria's voice explaining blood flow dynamics late at night. He missed her with a depth that frightened him, but he knew wanting her back wasn't enough. Love required more than longing. It demanded loyalty, courage, and presence. Things he hadn't offered when it counted. So, he wrote her a final letter, not to win her back, but to free her from the echo of him. In it, he wrote, "If you ever wonder what I carry now, it's not your name, it's your strength. You gave it freely, and I was too afraid to hold it." He sealed it, unmailed. Some apologies were meant for no one but the soul that gave them. Valeria returned to her lab routine, immersing herself in trials and data, her heart slowly adjusting to the rhythm of peace. But the quiet stillness no longer frightened her. It comforted her. She was rebuilding a life where she didn't have to explain her worth or beg for understanding. The team she led admired her for her clarity, her fire, and her refusal to compromise. Dr. Navarro had offered her the directorship of Ascend's new pediatric initiative, and she accepted with a steady smile. Every day was not easy. Some mornings the ache returned. Some nights, she still dreamed of the people who had once held her heart and let it fall. But each sunrise brought new certainty. She had survived. Not only that, she had risen. And no shadow of the past could rewrite her now. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Valeria walked to the lakeside garden her mother once loved, a hidden oasis in the middle of the city. She sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, the breeze carrying whispers through the leaves. She opened her journal and wrote just one sentence. "They tried to bury me, but I was the seed." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about becoming someone who didn't need to. She closed the journal, stood, and breathed in the scent of fresh lavender blooming nearby. The locket around her neck gleamed in the sunlight. And as she walked away from the bench, she didn't look back. Valeria's world had changed in ways she never expected, and much of that change came in the form of Adrian Kane. He was the young CEO of a fast-growing tech company, brilliant and ambitious, yet gentle and understanding in a way that made Valeria's guarded heart open slowly. Their first meeting had been purely professional, a collaboration that blossomed into late nights discussing future innovations and dreams. Adrian admired Valeria not just for her scientific genius, but for her fierce independence and the way she refused to let her past define her. Valeria found herself laughing again, a sound that surprised her after so much silence. With Adrian, there was no pressure, no unspoken expectations, only support and encouragement. He saw her as a partner, not a project, which made all the difference. Their bond deepened with every conversation, every shared secret, and every quiet moment of understanding. For the first time in years, Valeria allowed herself to hope, not for revenge or validation, but for happiness. She was beginning to believe that love could exist without pain. One evening, Julian stood outside her apartment, rain soaking through his coat as uncertainty twisted in his chest. He had watched her from a distance, torn between hope and the bitter sting of regret. The moment the door opened and he saw Adrian's hand resting gently on her shoulder, the weight of reality hit him hard. Valeria's eyes held no warmth for him, only a calm resolve that cut deeper than any anger could. "Julian," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know." His heart clenched, voice trembling. "Is there no chance for us? Can we fix what was broken?" She shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm happy now with Adrian. What we had is gone, and I can't go back." Julian swallowed the lump in his throat, struggling to accept her words. "I just want you to be happy," he whispered, then turned away into the night. Inside, Adrian waited with quiet strength, watching as Valeria closed the door behind Julian. His fingers found hers instinctively, grounding her after the painful encounter. "You okay?" he asked gently, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. She nodded, a fragile smile touching her lips. "Better than okay," she said softly. "I'm finally free." The city lights glittered through the window, casting a warm glow around them. With Adrian, the past felt distant, like a shadow fading at dawn. He didn't ask for her scars to vanish. He honored them as part of her story. Their love wasn't about rewriting history, but building something new together. For Valeria, that was more than enough. The next weeks were filled with a strange but wonderful kind of normal. Work thrived under her leadership, and Adrian became a steady presence at her side. Their relationship was slow and careful, built on trust rather than desperation. They celebrated small victories, a breakthrough in the pediatric project, a quiet dinner away from the chaos, a shared laugh over an inside joke. Valeria discovered parts of herself she thought were lost forever, like the ability to relax and simply enjoy the moment. Julian's absence was still felt, but it no longer consumed her thoughts. Instead, she focused on the present and the future Adrian represented. Every day with him was a gift she refused to take for granted. Her heart was no longer a battlefield, but a sanctuary. And for the first time in a long time, she felt whole. Despite the growing love with Adrian, a shadow lingered whenever Julian's name came to mind. She knew his pain was genuine, but also understood that some wounds were too deep for forgiveness. Valeria's strength wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing not to be defined by it. She had learned that forgiveness was hers to give or withhold, and right now, she withheld it from Julian. It was not hate but self-protection, a boundary she needed to keep. The past could stay where it belonged, behind her, as she stepped forward into this new chapter. With Adrian's hand in hers, she felt ready for anything. No longer a victim of betrayal, but a survivor with a future worth fighting for. And as she looked at the man who loved her for everything she was, she knew she had made the right choice. This was her new light, and she would never let it fade. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, sunlight pouring into the garden where friends and family gathered. Valeria's dress was simple yet elegant, reflecting the woman she had become, strong, graceful, and certain. Adrian waited at the altar with a smile that warmed her soul, eyes full of love and unwavering support. The ceremony was intimate, filled with laughter and tears, the kind that speak of healing and hope. Vows were exchanged, promises made not from desperation but from a deep understanding of what it meant to build a life together. Valeria's heart swelled as she spoke her commitment aloud, feeling the weight of every word as a celebration of her journey. Around her, people who had witnessed her rise from pain to power smiled with genuine joy. Julian stood at the edge of the crowd, his face a mixture of regret and acceptance. He knew this was a beginning he could no longer be part of. Some doors closed forever, and this was one of them. After the ceremony, Julian approached Valeria quietly, the sound of celebration humming behind them. His voice was soft, almost pleading, "I don't hold anything against you. Is there truly no chance for us?" Valeria met his gaze calmly, a gentle strength shining through her eyes. Julian, I forgave myself long ago, but that doesn't mean I forgive what happened between us. Her words were firm but kind, a boundary he couldn't cross. I'm happy now with Adrian. You broke me too deeply to go back. The sadness in his eyes was real, but so was her resolve. Thank you for telling me honestly, he said before stepping back, allowing her space to move forward. There was no bitterness, only the quiet finality of a chapter closing. Valeria turned away from Julian and found Adrian waiting with open arms and a hopeful smile. Taking his hand, she felt the warmth of a future built on trust and love. Together, they walked back into the garden where friends celebrated their union and new beginnings. Every step felt lighter, the weight of the past fading further into the distance. The shadows of betrayal were replaced by the bright glow of a love earned and freely given. Valeria's heart was no longer tethered to pain, but expanded by joy. She was ready to face whatever the future held with the man who saw her as whole and worthy. Their love was a testament to survival and the power of choice. And in that love, she found the forever she had always deserved. That night, as the city lights twinkled below her balcony, Valeria reflected on the path that had brought her here. The journey had been long and painful, marked by loss and betrayal, but also by courage and hope. She clutched the locket that held her mother's picture, a reminder of the strength passed down to her. Adrian's steady presence beside her was a new kind of legacy, one built on love, respect, and partnership. Forever wasn't a lie anymore. It was the story she chose to write. As she leaned into Adrian's embrace, she whispered a quiet vow to herself, to cherish this love and never let fear or doubt steal it away. The past was a shadow behind her, but the future blazed bright and open. And with that, Valeria closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that this was truly the beginning of everything. Enjoyed this video? Don't forget to explore more amazing stories on our channel. Thanks for listening to my little stories. Your one subscription might seem small, but to a storyteller, it's everything.